Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here, and one of the things I enjoy the very most about these sorts of festivals are all the young people that, without whom the festivals wouldn't run. And I've had the same experience everywhere I go that young artists ask me, how do you keep going? How do you keep your ideas going? How do you keep your career going? So today I've attempted to put my program together to illustrate a little bit how one idea leads into another, and also to talk a little bit how one opportunity comes into another. I come from a part of the country in the United States that's very collaborative, and all the works that you're going to see today are the result of a lot of collaboration. I've had about 10 years of a very intensive collaboration with one particular scientist, and then I also have a very intense collaboration with my programmer, Jim Bell. And all the people that are listed there are very important to the success of my work. Several years ago, I was looking at the alumni magazine at my university where I got my MFA, the University of Montana, and I saw an image of a skeletal bird in flight. I was very intrigued because it was part of a system called cineradiography, which allows you to see a motion picture X-ray. So my habit is, when I see something that I'm very interested in, to write to the person, no matter if I think they'll answer me or not. I just reach out and try to make some contact. So I wrote to the scientific researcher, and he said, I'm very interested in your work, and I'm an artist, and I'd really like to know more about what you're doing. And so we began this dialogue, and he said, oh, you can use whatever I have. And I did a piece in 2000 using the skeletal bird flight. And several years later, I read in our newspaper that he had moved to Portland, where I live. And I sent him another email, and I said, oh, I see you're here. Can we get together? And he said, oh, great. Let's have coffee on Thursday. So I went to his lab, and I asked him if he had any more of this motion picture X-ray footage. And he said, yes, you can use whatever I have, but I just got this new imaging system, and I think an artist could do something very interesting with it. And the system is called digital particle image velocimetry. And what it does is it allows scientists to visualize the interaction of a physical body and the air. It's a tool for visualizing fluid dynamic physics. This is my collaborator, Brett Tobowski. He's the one that said, oh, sure, you can use whatever I have. And he is one of the main people doing this sort of research in the United States, and he was, as a matter of fact, just featured in the New York Times on the cover of their science section for the same research. He built 2 of the 5 wind tunnels in the United States that are used for this kind of research. Digital particle image velocimetry works by creating an atmosphere of particles, and in this case it's tiny little particles of olive oil, and then shooting video at a very high level of frame rate. So these shooting at 1,000 frames a second. And that's not important to my artwork, but it's important to the ability of the system to do what it does. Because what happens is the computer software selects 3 of these particles as the as the framework. And then it's able to track every particle in a cloud of olive oil. Which is really good because I'm Italian and I like olive oil and it doesn't hurt the birds. So the video is shot from 3 different points of view. It makes a complete 3-dimensional map of what's happening inside the wind chamber. And I won't go too deeply into the science of this. Brett gave me some of his slides for another conference that was much more intensely focused on art and science. But what happens is that the map allows the scientists to visualize vorticity and velocity. And also it allows them to visualize how the body of the bird is generating wind currents and also responding to the existing currents. So this is the video that I made in response. And one of the interesting things about our collaboration was that in science, everything has to be repeated a million times in order to prove that it is actually true. And of course, in art, you may not want to have everything repeat a million times. So I tried to search, I'm not getting any sound, but I guess that's okay. I tried to search for other ways to vary the content of the video that we were creating together. You can see here how the waveforms are in the air are visualized by the software. And the bird becomes very abstract. In some points it becomes almost completely unrecognizable, which I found really interesting. And when Brett looks at this, he can read this, he can tell you numbers based on this, of what's happening. I tried to find ways to vary the content, and so I also work with a very accomplished cinematographer. I had a public art commission that this work could be part of, and so I used some of my budget for that to hire a really skilled video photographer, to do some shooting in the wild. And I had asked my collaborator, Brett, can you ever film the birds in the wild? And he said, well, that would be ideal, because having them in a wind chamber is a really artificial situation. So we're learning something, but we're not really learning the truth. But he said it's impossible to film birds in the wild because their motion is too erratic. Well, when he saw this footage, it was really sort of a revelation to him, because my cinematographer was so skilled. We were really far away from these birds, and he had a gigantic camera, which I'll show you in a minute, that allowed him to get close to the birds, and he had the skill to follow them. I like my installations to have a three-dimensional aspect to them, and to have a space that viewers can move around. So another aspect of Brett's research was to analyze the wing shapes that the birds would form in response to these air currents. So I took his research and abstracted it into a whole series of stainless steel and vellum wings. And the vellum is a really amazing projection surface that'll catch an image even if it's at a right angle to the screen. So I'm going to go quickly through these because we don't have a huge amount of time. But these pictures were all taken from the same camera angle. The wings were suspended from a swivel, so the tiniest amount of air current in the room would activate these wings. And then this slide is just for the scale. The wings are probably 7 or 8 feet, the largest one, wide. And then here you can see how they respond to the air currents in the room. And I'm really sorry the sound's not working because it's an interesting soundtrack. But Once again, this is all shot from the same camera position. So the wings are moving. Just the tiniest amount of air movement in the room allowed these to move. And that was very important to Brett because his whole research has to do with what's happening with air in relationship to the bird's movement that's really invisible, usually. So I wanted to just show a little bit about how we accomplish shooting in the wild. This is Harry Dawson, who's a wonderful filmmaker. And this is the camera that he used for our shoot. And we took it out to a very wild area where there are a lot of wild cranes in migration. And also to an urban site where there were some swifts that flock in a characteristically vortex form. And that's the same shape that is so critical to birds' flight in the microcosm. The flocking birds created the same shape in the macrocosm. So we went out and shot this video. Once again, it was just to see how much variety I could get for the artwork. And I brought it back, and Brett was really amazed that we were able to capture what we could. And I said, well, do you think that the software could track the birds the same way it tracks the olive oil drops? And he said, I never thought of that, but I bet it could. And he said, I'm going to try and make that work, but it's going to take me about an hour and a half. So go home and I'll email you if it works. So an hour and a half later, he sent me this email. And this is as far as we've gotten with this. He was able to pick out several birds in the first frame of the video and have the software track them. But it wasn't of any use for him as a scientist because there wasn't any grid that would allow him to measure the space. So he's now writing a National Science Foundation grant for us to continue with this work. Another outcome of this that I was really happy about, and it connects to our post-conflict theme, was that I was doing a public art project, which I'm not going to show today, there's not enough time, in Arizona. And it was an area where the pollinators that are so critical to habitat, any kind of habitat in agriculture, are their environmental situation is in crisis. And I was hired to do a 5-mile-long trail plan. And I was able, based on Brett's research, to persuade the project manager to change from doing just ornamental plants that could be anywhere. They could be in England. They don't belong in Arizona. But I was able to persuade them to plant 5 miles of pollinator habitat based on what I learned from Brett. So then I wanted to talk about one thing leading to another. I had then, at that point in my career in 2005, had a very successful collaboration with a scientist. And there was a big public art commission for the Portland State University. And they knew that I could work successfully with researchers. And so I was hired to make a video project for the new academic and student center. This is a holographic screen. It doesn't make a hologram. The screen itself is a hologram. And so what it means is that you can project on a sheet of glass, and at night you have a very vivid image, but during the day the window just looks like a window. So I'll show a little bit of that. And while this is playing, I can talk to you a little bit about some of the opportunities that come from things that you might not think it's an opportunity at the time. So they didn't want me to do what I wanted to do, which was to make a big glass sculpture and project onto that. They really just wanted an urban screen. That freed a lot of the budget for me to be embedded in the university for an entire year. And I worked with 18 different faculty members, And I was able to, with some of them, to establish again a very intensive collaboration. I sought out the professors that were using video imaging and digital, specialized digital imaging in their research. And then I also worked with the humanities department. So being disappointed allowed for another opportunity to open up. And I think that's a really useful way to think about how to navigate the art world, because usually there's some opportunity that you can find, even in a situation that's not ideal. So then, and the other thing that came from that project, I'll just talk about a little bit. In the building is a swimming pool. And my client kept saying, "We want you to do something in the swimming pool." And I kept thinking, oh my God, this is really, it was a lap pool. People were swimming back and forth in monotonous lanes. And I just thought, I was really very resistant. And finally I slapped myself on the head and said, "You idiot. You have all this money, you can do an underwater shoot." And it allowed me to come to something that had been in my mind for a really long time. I hired a choreographer, Linda K. Johnson, who's really kind of a wizard of movement. And I had been working with a scientist there who was interested in visualizing the shapes that underlie nature. I had a whole vocabulary of shapes that I had learned from this professor, John Rauter, and I gave those to Linda and said, "Do you think you can choreograph something underwater using these shapes?" Because again, they were about fluid dynamics, these shapes. So this is the entry to the piece that is the larger piece from which the piece in the exhibition here came. It's called The Method of Loci. And I've been thinking about the method of loci since I was a student in Italy in 1983, because we learned about it in our art history class there. It's the proto-computer system, but it's all mental. It's the way that the ancients were able to memorize really long texts before the invention of printing, and it actually has influenced the design of computer interfaces today. So Windows, the method of loci is very architectural. Windows, the Mac interface, all of that came from scientists studying ways to organize memory and working with the method of loci. So I designed a labyrinthine space, which you'll see in a little while. And the other opportunity that came from my bird research was that I went to a residency in China, where I met Jim Bell, who's a wonderful computer programmer, artist/musician from Montreal. This is Jim and I working on trying to figure out how to mimic the way memory works in your mind using the software. And one of my other collaborators is a psychologist who studies memory, and memory is very subjective. So if you think of something that you did when you were 5 years old and you haven't thought of it since you were 5 years old, that will be an accurate memory. If you think about something every day the memory changes. So I wanted to look at how memory changes. This is the jitter patch that is operating the piece that's downstairs in the exhibition. And what it does is it takes a series of clips and it layers them together. Downstairs it's a little bit random because I wasn't able to use all the motion sensors that I normally use. There wasn't enough time to install that. But in the larger exhibition, there's a series of motion sensors, and they organize the way the clips change depending upon the character of the movement in the room. I used to say my pieces were interactive, now I say they're reactive, because you are aware that something different about how things are changing, but you can't tell. I mean, it's not like you wave your hand and something specific happens. It's much more subtle than that. So this just gives you a little bit of scale. And in my larger exhibition, the pool was projected into a 7-foot diameter disc. There was also a lifeguard chair that you could sit in and look down into the pool. This is the second room of that installation called Lamentations. And this was done at a later time, and we used Connect to create a series of rooms within the room, but they were invisible rooms. And you can see on the center left of the slide, you can see the structure of those rooms that Jim created. The Connect sensor sees up to 4 people's movement in the room. And then this would be the viewer's experience inside the room and the scale of that room. I also, in my research about memory, I discovered that the memories that are most potent and that you are also remain the most accurate are dramatic images. And when I was a child, my house burned to the ground, so that was a really dramatic memory for me. And also in the area of Italy that my family's from, they mark very dramatic events during the Napoleonic Wars with fire festivals. So I traveled to Italy to film these fire festivals. And those also are being layered with max MSP jitter. This slide shows a little bit of how the architecture in the space works. It was a series of interlocking rooms, and you, depending upon your point of view from the room, you would see different combinations of imaging. So along with it being digitally interactive, you had a different experience depending upon where you were in the space, and as you moved through the space, your experience would change. That's just a scale piece for this room is called Lamentations. And then another room in the project was called Research. These were the instruments that I wanted to make for the university project. This is what I wanted to make, and they wouldn't let me make it. So I kept that idea, and when I do a public art project, I write my contract so that every outtake from the project belongs to me. So I still had all this scientific imaging material, and I decided to go back to my original idea for the university and make it at a smaller scale. I also worked with the same forms that you see in the pool, that are the fundamental forms of physics that underlie everything. And I found, again, reached out to somebody. We have a very huge and famous scientific glassblowing company in Portland, and they blow things for the space shuttle. Believe it or not, they're giant glass things in the space shuttle. And they were only too happy to connect me with one of their glass blowers who blew the drawings, and the glass pieces in the back based on my drawings. So this is another view. This is projecting. I had a lot of sample scraps of that holographic screen, so I used those to create a sense of containment in the cone-shaped piece. That room was called Search. This is another room called Ongoing Search. And I wanted to look at the 2 different ways that people are seeking in life. One way is to sort of intellectual and abstract and logical way, and then there are the searches that we make that are more emotional or psychological or spiritual. Several years ago, there was a child lost in Portland. They still haven't found this child. And I saw some video on TV on the news of people searching a place that's really kind of a sacred place to Portland called Sauvie Island. And they were mounted searchers on horseback searching with a stick through the swamp to try and find this child. Another thing I'm interested in is how we have myth in our culture that seems to keep repeating itself, and while they were searching for this child, I kept thinking of the myth of Demeter and Persephone, and how universal the tragedy of a lost child is. But I wasn't only thinking about that, I was thinking about other things they're searching for too. So I worked with the same dancer, Linda K. Johnson, to do a search on Sauvie Island. And so these are just some still frames from the search. And I really wanted to make a hole in the floor, and now I know I could do that because I sort of made a hole downstairs. Well, it's not really a hole, it's just a board. But for this piece, I made like a stepped well. And at the bottom of the well, there's a small child swimming away from you underwater. So that was a little bit of a symbol of what was going on. And it looks like, actually, I don't know if I have enough time to show my video. I don't think I do. Carlos? I either need to go on to the next thing or stop. I have 5 minutes, okay. So, not this video, but the one that we had before. Well, let's go on to the 10-minute one. I think it's on the desktop. Or maybe just do this one. So here you can see a map of the way the rooms were interlocking. And I don't think we'll get a chance to go through all this. In fact, I'm sure we won't. But this was what a viewer would see when they entered the room. And then all of the screens, the major screens were they were dual-sided screens, so you had one combination of images from the outside of the room and then another combination of images from the inside of the room. This is going into the Lamentations room. And I'd like to combine sculpture with video and to create a more tactile and physical experience for viewers. So I think we're just going to get to see this one room, but in that room there was a basin that was made out of copper. So they're flanked by two different videos, one of these hands and one of the fire. And depending upon where you were standing in the room, you would see the hands reflected in the water or the fire reflected in the water. And this is the room that was being organized by Connect. And in this room there were two different Easter eggs. And people who are familiar with programming will understand the term Easter egg. They were events that would happen only if a certain sequence of activities happened in the room. So I think one of the things we always struggle with as artists is how much drama is too much drama, or how over the top do we want things to be. And there were some images in here that I wanted to be there, but I only wanted them to be there in a very fleeting and infrequent way. So those images were the Easter eggs. And there was also a sound that was very suggestive. But I didn't want to define the viewer's experience for them too much. So this sound, this very suggestive sound, also was another one of the Easter eggs. The layering that's happening in the videos and in the video downstairs, it's not a loop. I didn't edit that in a timeline in Final Cut Pro or Premiere. It's happening in real time, and the changes are being controlled by the Connect. Here you can see moving around the room, looking through the doorway at another image. And I think I'm out of time. Thank you.